Know how Muslims say a lot that about the Bible being corrupt.
Yeah.
So what is your reasoning? So if you can give me like some general reasonings for why Muslims say that.
When the Quran disagrees with the Bible, it implies that the Quran regards this section to be changed or corrupt or not part of the original message.
Right.
Another reason is also when it comes to like certain verses of the Quran, it says, for example, like they forgot a part of the message, as well as people write things with their own hands.
Yeah.
In order to profit by it.
Right.
They say this is from God when it's not, and God condemns them. Like God says not to say anything about him except the truth. So things like this, like from the Quran. There's also a hadith as well in which it's mentioned that not to change the Quran. The Quran may become corrupted, just like what the people of the book did to their own scriptures.
Oh, do you know? Is that a paraphrase of what it says? Does it?
Yeah, I'm paraphrasing. It's a hadith from Bukhari. It's regarding the compilation of the Quran.
Yeah.
The context is to do with about compiling the Quran into like a single volume or a single codex, and so.
But I think isn't that the one where it says about so that they don't argue like the Jews and Christians?
Something like this to this effect, yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So what it sounds like what you're saying is that in terms of corruption, you mean like things like, I don't know, verses different here and there and disagreements between certain things which are written in there.
Well, one is to do with the view of the Quran. Does the Quran regard the previous scriptures to be changed or not?
Yeah.
And another is to do with whether they have actually been changed or not.
Right.
So do you believe that the Bible has undergone change, or do you believe it's the same as it was 2,000 years ago?
Well, when you look at the history of it, it's not a case of there was a single Bible. What happened is that they decided, so because obviously you had the writings like the Gospels, which were in various churches, and they were kept as papyrus, because obviously the churches weren't rich, so that was the easiest way for them to write down what they were learning, or what they were memorizing. So the way it is that when I look at what they say, is that it's it wasn't at that time, it wasn't put into a book, so there wasn't really a Bible at the time of the early church. It's only once they collected, you could say with the Codex Sinaiticus, it could be the first one that they could call a Bible. So up until then, it was just the writings that people collected.
Yeah, initially, I mean, each of the writers would have been written in a separate scroll, and they were not necessarily regarded as scripture in terms of the New Testament. So you have Paul's letters, which are like his own private correspondence that he had with his churches, and then you have the Gospels, and each Gospel is like attributed to a particular important personality in history of the church. But it says the Gospel, like for example, according to Matthew, or the Gospel according to John. But what they mean by that is that this is the understanding of Matthew of what the Gospel is, or this is the understanding of John or Luke as to what the Gospel is. Because even Luke, for example, says in his preface that many have undertaken or undergone to write things which have taken place or fulfilled amongst us. So it seemed good to me also to write an orderly account. So Luke seems to be saying that the other writings are either like inferior to his writings, or that they've been changed or something to this effect. Because most critical scholars believe that Luke used Mark as a source to write his own gospel. So when you compare Matthew and Luke with Mark, often you'll find that Matthew disagrees with the order of Mark. So he places the stories in different... No, actually it's Luke who disagrees, and he has the stories in different arrangement.
Yeah, well, all of them do. None of them are really written to because that's one of the things about it is that if what happened was that a group of people collaborated.
Oh, walaikum salam. See.
Yeah, a group of people collaborated to come up with the writings of the New Testament, then you'd expect them to actually be more organized. So the fact it's all over the place, that shows you that it was a group of people who each had what they felt was from God, and then they followed it.
Because Luke is supposed to be writing like an orderly account, so that his friend Theophilus may have certainty of the things that have been fulfilled.
Yeah.
So this seems to imply that Luke regarded the other writings as not being, not having the same certainty or the same confidence as his own gospel.
Well, but it doesn't say that though. So all he says is that...
What does it mean that you may have certainty of the things that have...
No, it's a certainty because when he's writing to Theophilus, what he'd say there is then, according to what you're saying, then he would have said then, the other ones that you've read, I'm going to write a better one than those. So for it to be better, then you'd presume Theophilus would then have had others which are inferior.
Yes, I agree with that. Yeah, Luke believes his gospel is better than the other gospels.
Yeah, but my point is, Luke didn't say that. He just said, I want to write it so that you... It seemed good to me also having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first. So when I read this, all he's saying is that he's going to give Theophilus a version which is as good as he can do, and he's just mentioning that other people have done it as well, but he's not. There's no comparison here.
Well, he's saying that he's carefully investigated the things from the start.
Yeah, but he's not saying the other things.
That's what makes his gospel better than the others, because he's having like more carefully investigated as opposed to the others, and his account is orderly as opposed to being disorderly like the other accounts.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Luke doesn't say anything against the other accounts. That's something that someone can maybe imply, but that's not what Luke's specifically saying.
So if you look at the Greek word, when he says that many have undertaken to write, let me just pull up the exact word. Luke chapter 1 verse 1.
Yeah, just says to put hand on, to go about taking hand. So it's just a physical action. It's nothing like intellectual.
Yeah. So from what I remember, when it says an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, that you may have certainty concerning the things that have been taught.
Yeah.
Orderly account here can imply, according to James Table, that some form of corruption or something like this. I can't remember. It was an interview that he did on Blogging Theology, James Table, and he was giving like his understanding of why he believes here. Luke seems to regard the other gospels as being corrupted or not being so perfect, and he's
so this James Table, he's a senior, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a biblical scholar. He's like
how senior
so he's now retired,
right.
but he's written many books like on biblical studies. So his specialty is on late Second Temple Judaism, and early Christianity, and Paul and the Jesus movement. He used to teach at the University of North Carolina, at Charlotte.
So did you have any peer-reviewed papers talking about that subject, about
Luke?
Yeah.
I don't know, but it was an interview that he did on blogging.
Yeah, no. So that's the thing. So any person can have say what they want to on even if they have they're like a doctor, etc.
Oh, okay. Because I was gonna say he's not any person. He's a biblical scholar.
Yeah, but the peer reviewing part's important, because if he's like a renegade, so we need to know he's not a renegade. And so the only way we can know that is if he says what he says and it's been peer reviewed by people. Then we know that what he says is more authoritative.
Okay, sure. I find what he says is also seems to be agreed with Luke's commentary by Francis Buffon. So I'll just pull up Luke 1:1.
Because you have to admit that from what you're saying, you have to say that, I would say anyway, that they're reading into it. Because they're not using words actually in the text to explain what they're saying.
The thing is, when it comes to like biblical studies, a lot of the time when you're doing history, people tend to theorize as well as give hypotheses. So they're looking at, for example, like words like in the Greek, and they're comparing like how the same words are being used in other literature. And so many have undertaken. So I'm just looking. I remember reading the word undertaken has negative connotations in the Greek.
It sounds to me like they're reaching a bit though.
Let me see.
Because what would be interesting if a load of scholars agreed with it. And this is the other thing, is if he has that opinion, you'd think that if he knew the opinion was solid, he would actually get quotes from other scholars who have agreed with him.
Oh yes, so here it is. So they're saying that on the one hand, Luke classes himself among the many that have undertaken to write an account. But then on the other hand, he introduces his own product as a better and more reliable. And they're saying that this word he uses in the Greek, I don't know, can you read Greek?
No.
Okay, so they're saying this Greek word here, elsewhere, if you look it up, it has a negative sense or negative meaning, like in Acts 9:29 and Acts 19:13. So like in 9:29, if I pull it up, Acts chapter 9 verse 29, and he spoke and disrupt against the Hellenists, but they were seeking to kill him. So if we look up the Greek word, maybe also Acts.
Which word is that? I mean the.
Yeah.
What, in hand? Tell the context might have been if it's hard to.
So also Acts 19, chapter 19, verse 13. Chapter 19, verse 13. And then some of the itinerant Jews, Exodus, undertook to invoke the name of the Lord Jesus over those who had evil spirits, saying, "I enjoy you by the Jesus whom you proclaim." So he means the word undertook.
Yeah,
so when Luke uses the word undertook, it has a negative meaning attached to it.
That's like super reaching, because you can undertake to do anything. So the word undertake is not a it's not a word which is really controlled by context, because it has a simple meaning. So usually it's when a word is ambiguous, that's when it can be controlled by the context. But undertake is just a physical thing, you just do something.
Yeah.
It doesn't have anything apart from you just doing it. So whether you do it for evil, good, a bad thing happens or a good thing happens, the word is just exactly the same.
Well, he's saying that if you look at how Luke uses the same word elsewhere, he uses it in a negative sense. So yeah, it's this word, epiherio, have undertaken.
Yeah, this is.
So if we look up the references, like in Luke and Acts.
Yeah, no, because the problem is this word by itself can't control the context. I don't know if you know what I mean. Because like a word "the," it has no control over the context, does it? It's whatever the other words around it mean. So undertake is the same, because undertake is just you doing something. So because it's so simple, the action, it sounds to me like he's reaching like a long way. But this is a classic case where can you get anyone else to agree with him on what he's saying?
Yeah, so this is like from a commentary, a Bible commentary. It's part of the Hermenia Bible series.
Right.
So I have it on the Logos app. So they're saying that Luke means it in a negative sense, that his gospel is better compared to the other gospels, whereas...
all right, well that seems...
But did you wanted to ask me about something, like, because...
Well, it's
why do I believe the Bible's been changed, or?
Yeah, well, see, this is one of them. So, but then there's because you know how when like when I hear you speaking, you will go through like a whole load of different verses. You know, when you're speaking to people, and so I've noticed that you've like memorized quite a few verses in the Bible.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering. So when you do that, that is to try and show the problems with it. That's why you do that?
Not necessarily. I mean, the Bible is like a reference point which both Muslims and Christians can use in the like vernacular, like when having dialogue with one another.
Right.
Because I can like quote the Quran to you, but you don't necessarily regard the Quran as being an authority. Whereas if I make the same point using the Bible, then that has some weight, like in the discussion.
Yeah, but wouldn't that work in the negative? Because if you're trying to get someone to believe in what your
belief,
your belief is, if your belief is strong, then you think that you then be able to like overwhelm whatever theirs is using the strength of your belief. Because I have to admit that when I'm speaking to some conversations I have with like,
for example, if I said the Quran teaches that Jesus isn't God, you don't believe in the Quran anyway, but if I show you from the Bible that the Bible teaches that Jesus isn't God, then that carries more weight. Because at the end of the day, it's about reaching the same conclusions, regardless of how you come to it. Right. So the message of Islam is submission to God's will, and that means not associating partners with God or co-equals. So if that's coming to that same conclusion, whether it's through the Quran or through the Sunnah of the Prophet or through the Bible, that's the main thing, not so much how you got there.
Right. So you know when the because I don't know if there are Muslims have different ideas on how corrupt they believe the Bible is. Because I know there's some Muslims who won't quote it at all. So is there a set like ruling in Islam of what line Muslims should have, or is it that Muslims just generally tend to have different positions on whether they?
I don't think there's like per se like an official position as to like how much of the Bible's been changed or corrupted. So really it's left up to people's own like independent study as to what they believe. But generally, like, we would use the Quran as a filter in order to subjugate like the Bible as well as anything else, like the Gitas or the Vedas or the Buddhist scripture, and even the Hadith. We would subjugate them to the Quran in order to like filter out the wheat from the chaff.
Okay, but do you know of any Muslim scholars who study any other books apart from the Bible?
Scholars.
Done it in depth
there's someone called Al-Biruni. Have you heard of Al-Biruni?
No.
So he's a famous Muslim scholar, and he studied the Hindu religion.
Right.
So he wrote a very famous book called Kitabul al-Hind, which is about the history of India. And from what I know, he looked into the Hindu scriptures.
Right.
Al-Biruni.
Do you know?
Alberuni. Yeah. So I think he actually wrote maybe the first like book on comparative religion.
All right.
like someone who studied a religion other than his own, but from an objective academic point of view, because you've had like works done before, whereas the difference between his works and the works that were done previously is that his work wasn't intended to be a polemical work against Hinduism, but he's just simply scientifically or objectively looking at Hinduism and documenting Hinduism. So in that, it was unique.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard of what's his name? Ibn Hazm.
Yes.
Yeah. From Andalus.
Like 9th century plus about.
Yeah. Well, he's 10th. He was 994 to 1064. I think.
Okay. So that would be 10th and 11th century, roughly.
Yeah. I should have asked. So this al-Biruni, what year was he around?
That's a good question. I do not know. Al-Biruni. Oh, sorry, it's Albiruni, Al-Biruni. So he was 973, he was born. So the 10th century, so about the same time as Ibn Hazm. So yeah. He's a very famous Muslim scholar that is not mentioned or spoken about as much as he deserves to be, but yeah.
But I suppose maybe it's because the fact that the people of the book are mentioned in the Quran, but I suppose the Hindus will count as the idolaters rather than the people.
Well, this is the thing. The Muslims that went on to like conquer India, they came to the conclusion that people of the book also includes Hindus as well, because they also had a religious scripture that was before the Quran, and the Quran mentions that God sent messengers to every nation before the time of the coming of the Prophet Muhammad.
So these they were saying that they don't necessarily have to have a lineage from Abraham to.
No, because there's even prophets before Abraham. So like Noah, for example, is regarded as a prophet. There is the verse in the Quran about like we established from his seed prophethood with regards to is it Isaac or Jacob, but
maybe Jacob.
But there's also some people use this to exclude any non-Israelite or non-Jewish prophet. But the verse isn't saying that God only sent or established prophethood only amongst Jacob or Isaac's seed.
Right.
It doesn't use the word only, but the Quran refers to like prophets, or at least one prophet that I can think of before the time of Abraham.
Right.
And Abraham wasn't a Jew.
No.
So, because he's the father of other nations besides the Jews as well, because he had at least 2 sons. He may have had some other children as well, but we know like his most famous 2 sons, Isaac and Ishmael.
So with you feel that the Bible still has enough in it to use as a reference, but for using against Christians in order to help Islam. That's how you see it.
It's like a tool that's used to like further our discussion in dialogue between Muslims and Christians and Jews. And also the Bible wasn't used as a subtext for the Quran, because in the Quran it contains biblical stories as well, and the Quran doesn't always go into like full detail with regards to those stories. So it's interesting to compare the Bible to the Quran and to see what the Quran is referring to or alluding to based on what was already known in its environment in which it was being revealed and recited.
So when it comes to the Bible, how in terms of the level of what you might say is corruption, how bad would you think it is?
How badly the Bible's been corrupted?
Yeah, how?
I don't really know, to be honest. I'm still kind of like researching that issue, and it's like an ongoing learning process for me.
Right.
But I believe like the central message of Islam is still present in the Bible,
right.
Meaning there's one God, and that one God should be worshipped and served. Okay, so I still believe that message is still present, found in the Bible.
Oh, right. So like you were saying before, so you believe that it's whatever's in the Bible which doesn't go against the Quran, you feel that that's what's preserved?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So if we like do a when you obviously you've done a comparison because you've read the Quran and you've read the Bible as well. I know something I've said to a lot of Muslims where I keep going on about how I wouldn't switch to the Quran because what I've got in the Bible, the writings are a lot higher quality. So what do you think that the fact that obviously this is my opinion, that the writings, when I read them, I can understand them better, and to me they're of a higher quality. Do you think that quality is something which came from God, or do you think man just put that in? And I'm not talking about in terms of like writing it directly, but I mean influence, the quality.
Yes, I believe in scriptures that were revealed even before the time of the Prophet Muhammad. Right. So for me, it's not like a competition as to which one is better or the other. Right. Because if they both come from the same source or the originator, then you would expect them to be similar or alike.
Right.
So like when the Quran challenges people to produce a chapter like the Quran, the challenge is not to show that the Quran is like the previous scriptures or like the previous words of God, but the challenge is to show that the Quran is man-made. So like if you think that the Quran isn't from God, then by showing that the Quran is like the previous scriptures, and you're actually showing that the Quran is from God or is like the word of God. But if you want to show that the Quran isn't from God, then you should produce a chapter like the Quran, meaning like anyone can do it.
But because the thing about that particular challenge is, I have to admit, I don't quite understand it. Because some people might say, because I know that a lot of Muslims, they like, when you hear them singing the Quran, so they might make it sound like it's the eloquence of it. That's what it means. But do you believe that produce a chapter like it means what's written in it, or the eloquence, or like the style, or what is there an exact meaning for that term, produce something like it?
Yeah, so it says in chapter 2, verse number 22 to 23, I believe, that if you're in doubt about concerning what we have revealed upon the Prophet Muhammad, then produce a chapter or surah like it, and you will not be able to do it, and you will surely not. So it's basically, if you think that this isn't a revelation from God, then others can also produce something like it. But no one in the time of the Prophet Muhammad was able to meet the challenge, in that they weren't able to also produce a chapter or surah that was comparable or like the Quran, to show that it was of human origin.
I'm still not quite getting it. Because what would be the difference? Do you know, has anyone, like your scholars or anyone, described a way of seeing the difference between if it was from God or from man?
Yes, so there's been like even recently Mansoor Ahmed, Mansoor from Speaker's Corner, he recently did a YouTube video in which he this AI computer program. But there has been like videos and discussions that go more into detail as to what is meant by producing a chapter like it, to show that the Quran is from human origin.
Right. Yeah. I was going to say, about the AI. I was just reading I was reading for like about an hour.
Okay.
This is just something to do with a website where they have people giving answers about computer problems, and apparently some people have been putting answers from the AI on it. And apparently what they've said is that the problem they have with that is that the answers look really good. But if you actually examine the answers, technically they were problems.
Oh, okay. I would say it's still worth checking out the video just to understand what is meant by the challenge.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you don't have to agree with it, but just to understand like what is meant by the challenge. Because I feel that in the time of the Prophet, the Arabs, they were willing to go to war, they're willing to fight, and sacrifice their men, but they weren't able to meet the challenge because that would have been more easy for them to do and disprove Islam than go into war against the Muslims and persecuting them.
Right. I suppose you know what the name of this video is.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah. If you type Mansour Speaker's Corner, maybe.
Or was it on his Dawah Wise channel?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah. AI challenge. Yeah, this one. So I typed Mansour Speaker's Corner AI challenge, and it's the first video that comes up from his YouTube channel, Dawah Wise.
Right.
It's called Chart GPT Imitating the Quran, and there's another video on SC Dawah channel called The Challenge of the Quran by Mansour Ahmed. But in terms of like, there is some stuff that I do know, like if you take the 112th chapter of the Quran, it's about the unity of God. And what's interesting is that if you take the last letter, there's like a rhythm that it rhymes, but at the same time it has a message of message being of monotheism, pure, strict, unalterated monotheism. So say he is God the absolute, so say he's God the one and only, God the absolute, the eternal. He neither begets nor was he begotten, and there's none like unto him. But in the Arabic there's like a rhythmic tone, which has this meaning, but also rhymes as well.
But do you mean it's the actual...
And also it has a rational argument as well. Because if God is one and absolute, and he's independent, it means he's not begotten. Because if he's begotten, then he means he's not independent and absolute. And if he begets, it means he's not one and alone, or there's another like him.
Oh, right, okay. Okay. But this, to get that, what you're saying, that has to be in Arabic. So that won't be in the translation.
But in terms of the idea or the message, you can still get that from the English or from the translation. So God being one and absolute, he doesn't beget, because if he begets, then he's not one. And if he was begotten, then he's not independent, but he's dependent upon the begetter, and there's none like unto him. There's nothing comparable. So it has like a logical argument to the surah. But it's up to you whether you want to agree or accept it, but it is giving like a rational argument. And going back to the original point about the Bible, it's interesting is that in the Arabic it does echo, the Shema Israel in Hebrew, which is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. So the word one there is echad, and that verse 1 says, He is Allah Ahad. Say He is Allah Ahad. So Ihad and Ahad, they both mean the same thing in Arabic or Hebrew, which means one is absolute.
All right, So
one and alone,
So when it comes, so from what I've heard you say so far, so you then would believe that the people who were putting the Bible together, that they were or collecting it, that they were genuine and there wasn't any like deception in anything they were doing. Is that what you believe?
I believe that they were sincere, but sometimes they were sincerely mistaken or sincerely wrong.
Right.
So they came like with their own like prejudice to the text. So if the text disagreed with their own beliefs, they will regard that or see that as being a corruption or an interpolation. So they will try to restore it as to what they believe to be the correct teaching.
Yeah, well, that sounds like you might mean in relation to some of the later. Well, I know they were saying about the when they're talking about the edits in some of the later manuscripts. But do you know if anyone's mentioned any of things like that happen in the original papyrus?
Well, I mean, like you have 1 John chapter 5 verse 7.
Yeah.
In the King James Bible, and the reason why it appeared there was because it goes back to that question of like they sincerely believed, but they were sincerely mistaken because the person they wanted to include the Trinity into the Bible, but there wasn't any like Greek manuscript with 1 John 5:7.
Yeah.
So they wasn't going to include it unless if they have a Greek manuscript that has 1 John 5:7. And so someone forged a manuscript, and so people mistakenly copied that into the Bible, thinking that it was part of the original text. But then later on it was discovered to be an interpolation.
Yeah, but that was like a later happening, because I suppose the one that is more closer to what I'm thinking is like, you know, the one about the adulterous woman.
Yeah.
Because that was in relation to older manuscripts, not actually something that happened like post Catholic. Because obviously, from what I've read, the one to do with the 1 John 5:7, that was a post Catholic.
Yeah.
So was it the 14th century they say?
Well, they say it was the 16th century. So there's no Greek manuscripts prior to the 16th century that has 1 John 5:7.
Right.
Whereas when it comes to like John chapter 8, about the woman accused of adultery, that's not to be found in any manuscripts prior to the 5th century. Yeah, from what I know. So that would mean it's not in the Codex Sinaiticus, which is dated from the 4th century.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming maybe it's in the Codex Sinaiticus because that's 5th century. But from what I remember reading, it's not found in Greek manuscripts prior to the 5th century.
Right.
So it comes very late. And also sometimes it appears in different orders. So you know the story of the woman. It's like in our Bible it appears in chapter 8, but in the Greek manuscript sometimes it appears like in different orders.
Yeah, I
like
mean,
in another chapter or another place.
It would do, because you see, those papyrus, they wouldn't have. You could essentially say in the papyrus there wouldn't be any order anyway, because there'd be no chapter breaks, there'd be no verse numbers.
True, yeah, it was on a scroll.
Yeah, there'd be no headings or anything. So literally, it's the people who put together the Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. They're the ones who had to really like line things up, because the fact that they had to get the papyrus from different groups, and a lot of those groups wouldn't even have been.
But you know the translation that we read today isn't solely based upon the Codex Sinaiticus or Vaticanus. It's based upon what they call an eclectic text, which is basically a group of scholars, a committee, in which they vote onto what they think is the most probable reading. So they have like a group of manuscripts, and each manuscript have a variant, and then they vote on as to what they think was the most probable. So what we're reading today is something that didn't exist like prior, like 1,000 years ago.
Well, it did exist, it's just that there were different versions. There was slightly different versions.
Yeah, but so, the version that we're reading is different from like when they were reading the Codex Sinaiticus, for example.
No, but it wouldn't be different, because the majority of words would be the same.
Yeah, the majority, yeah.
Yeah,
But what I mean is not identical. Like it's another version.
Yeah, but
So like if you read the King James Bible, it's different from the Codex Sinaiticus.
yeah, you find
It's got obviously 1 John 5:7 and the longer ending of Mark's Gospel.
Yeah.
In the King James.
Yeah, so because that's the thing about it is like, see, with the and I think a lot of Muslims get confused about this because they think that they can talk about the Bible directly like the Quran. So they keep coming and say, oh, when was it revealed? Who revealed it? But the thing about it is that lots of different groups had the writings and it was collected. So in a way, like I say to some Muslims, it's like because the Bible is more a combination of the Quran, the Hadith, and Tafsir as well. So it is everything brought together. So you're not going to have like one reciter memorizing it and then telling these people, the whole entirety of what's in the Bible. And so because of that way,
you have people that copying from previous manuscripts. And there's intentional and unintentional changes.
Yeah, but then the problem you have with those changes is that the fact that you have so many manuscripts around, that if you try and do a change, like you said with the 1 John 5 and 7, the best they could get in was one verse. Because obviously if you try and do more...
Oh no, there are other examples. I mean, like if you look up Book of Acts chapter 8 verse 37, you won't find verse 37 in modern translations. It's missing.
Yeah, so
but it's in King James.
Yeah,
and that used to contain a confession that Jesus is the Son of God.
Yeah,
but it was discovered to be an interpolation.
Yeah,
and so it was removed, like in modern. So much so that even the Jehovah's Witnesses, the New World Translation, they don't have Acts chapter 8 verse 37, and even Mark chapter 1 verse 1, which says this is the gospel of Jesus. This is the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So the Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't also have the title Son of God, because it's not found in the Codex Sinaiticus nor in the Vaticanus as well. So some scholars doubt as to whether the title Son of God belongs there or not, and often you'll find in modern English translations, even those they still keep it, they still have a footnote to say it's not found in some of the most early reliable manuscripts of Mark.
But if we take all of these different, you're saying about the differences between verses between different manuscripts, and then the decisions that they made about which verses they're going to include in their translation. When you look at it, does it make much of a difference to what's actually taught in the Bible?
Well, it does in terms of the divinity of Jesus, and even the death and resurrection, because it shows that Christianity evolved. So it shows the history and development.
But you mean just a few
as to how, like if you take, for example, like the doctrine of the Trinity, you can see examples where Christology evolves and develops.
Right.
So, for example, the verse "Son of God" in Mark 1:1 is not found in the Codex Sinaiticus or the Vaticanus, and this is like a proof text that Trinitarians use to say that Jesus is the Son of God. So you may say Jesus is also called Son of God in other parts, but that's only because we don't have an antecedent to Mark's Gospel in which we can make that comparison to show that maybe these other places, the title Son of God, may have also been added.
Right, okay, but then in order to add the Son of God in, wouldn't then that cause a change in the context?
Yes, exactly. It does.
If you read a few of them, like a classic one is, the John 9 when the blind man asks Jesus.
Yeah, John chapter 9 verse 9.
Yeah.
And he says, I am he.
Yeah. So if the Son of God was taken out there, the actual sentence would just be completely broken.
It doesn't say Son of God, it says Messiah or Christ from what I remember. So he's basically, they're asking him like, did Jesus heal you? And
no, it's when he met Jesus afterwards. You know, after you got chucked out of the synagogue.
In chapter 9?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's later down. It's later on.
And blind and had received his sight until they called his parents of man and received his sight after. Is this your son who you say was born blind? See,
it's from 33.
Oh, okay.
This is after he got chucked out.
If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. Okay. And they answered him, "You were born in utter sin, and would you teach us?" And they cast him out. And Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and having found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And he answered, "Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" And Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you." So here Jesus is claiming to be the Son of Man.
Do you have an interlinear for that translation?
I've got for the King James I have.
But what translation is that?
ESV.
It sounds like they're suspect.
It was, I guess, the example.
No, the word is theos. So theos is not man.
So maybe there's a textual variant then.
Well, I don't know.
Because you can see in my one it says Son of Man.
Yes.
So John chapter 9 verse 35.
Okay, so does ESV give any kind of indication of what manuscripts they use? Obviously theos is a big difference from man.
Okay, let's see. Yeah, so they say some manuscripts the Son of God. So that goes